Chapter 1 Wuzhong City, Dao Zhong Empire, Imperial Calendar, Year 4268. Taking the reins of the docile donkey, Mogun led it through the southern gates of Wuzhong City and stopped dead at the sight that greeted him. Stretching hundreds of feet into the sky, the marble statue of a man dominated the view of everyone who passed through the gate. Standing like a silent sentry, the figure was carved to depict a classically handsome man in the prime of his life, dressed like an aristocrat, with both his hands resting on the pommel of an unsheathed sword held point down in front of him. Eyes drifting downwards, Mogun read the words chiseled onto the base of the statue.
Hanji, the sword god.
He always hated that monstrosity.
Came a voice from on top of the donkey, and Mogun turned to look up at the speaker. Yip, family name Locke, looked like the archetypal wandering vagabond, with his clothes well worn and travel-stained. His frame was lean, and his complexion tanned in the way of someone who had spent most of his life on the road. Right now, his weathered features were winkled up in a pleasant smile as he saw the curiosity in Mogun's eyes.
It's too ostentatious, and more importantly, it looks absolutely nothing like him.
Mogun smiled back, knowing that if anyone was qualified to make such a statement, it would be his master. Hearing a commotion, Mogun looked in the direction of the noise and saw a large group of people gathering at a spot in the busy streets. Turning back to Yip, he looked up with imploring eyes. A doting touch entered into Yip's smile before he nodded his approval for his apprentice to go investigate. With the giddiness of a schoolboy, Mogun led them towards the gathering crowd. Although not particularly tall or broad, Mogun was nevertheless a healthy young man of 17 years, and with his youthful energy, he easily made his way to the front of the crowd. Standing on opposite ends of a large circle formed by the onlookers were two men. Both were about the same age as Mogun, and stood glaring at each other with obvious hostility. The man on the left was plainly dressed, with a long sword strapped to his belt and a hand gripped on its pommel. His opponent, however, was anything but plainly dressed. Wearing gaudy clashing colors, his clothes were tailored to his tall, thin frame and trimmed with golden thread. Unlike the other man, he possessed no obvious weapon, but instead leaned against a large rectangular wooden box that reached up to his waist. Although his eyes were as hostile as the plainly dressed man's, they held a condescending glint that was absent from the other man. With a voice that dripped with disdain, the gaudy man spoke.
"Well, Yue Gong, are you going to admit that your school is a fraud, or do I have to beat it out of you?"
The man called Yue Gong bristled under the words, knuckles going white as he tightened his grip on the sword.
"Lam Xiu, my school's teachings are as true as yours."
Yue Gong snapped back. Mocking laughter erupted from his opponent.
"You dare compare your heretical dribble to my school's noble teaching of the words of the great sword god? Your delusions run even deeper than I thought."
Mogun's brow creased in confusion, and he turned to his master.
Master, isn't the lineage of the sword god preserved by just one master and one apprentice?
It is. But over the millennia, the line has been a source of inspiration and imitation for other lineages. These two are obviously descendants of such lineages.
Mogun rolled his eyes at the absurdity of the situation. They were like a pair of art forgers arguing over whose imitation was closest to the original work of art. The sound of a blade leaving its sheath, drew Mogun's attention back to the confrontation, and he turned to see Yue Gong drawing his weapon. Mogun was impressed. The man's stance was well balanced. His guard was ready but not tensed, his breathing even, and his gaze steady. It was an almost perfect on-guard position, putting the man's skill and experience on full display. In response, Lam Siu tightened his grip on the box, and its sides sprang open. Twin metallic streaks flew out, revealing themselves to be a pair of swords. They hovered in the air like well-trained falcons. More swords flew out of the box until a total of 8 blades floated above Lam Siu's head. The flock of flying blades descended upon Yue Gong, their flight frighteningly slow, like aerial predators converging on an already fallen prey. Returning his attention to Yue Gong, Mogun let out a disappointed sigh. With his enhanced senses, he could see the man's hand shivering as he tightened the grip on his sword, and hear the man's increasingly erratic breathing as panic began to set in. A moment later, Yue Gong's sword clattered to the ground, and the once proud swordsman slumped to his knees in defeat. Lam Siu's mocking laughter rang out, signaling the end of the duel and dispersing the crowd. With a final sad shake of his head, Mogun left with the masses and disappeared into the city's teeming streets. As Mogun led the donkey down a quiet alley, Yip spoke from on top of the mount.
So what did you think about the fight?
Yue Gong should have won.
Mogun answered matter-of-factly.
Oh, how so?
Lam Siu's style was too focused on being flamboyant. By having so many blades flying at once, his control over them was greatly reduced. He would have been better off just having 2 or 3 blades in flight. Had Yue Gong been able to keep his nerve, he could have shattered the threads of control between Lam Siu and his swords with a single determined strike.
With his apprentice facing away from him, Yip let the pride show on his face. At just 17 years old, Mogun still had a foot in childhood. Yet despite his tender age, he had displayed a comprehension that rivaled a seasoned warrior's. For a moment, Yip allowed himself to wallow in the self-satisfaction of having such a talented apprentice, before being brought out of his musing by Mogun's next words.
So, where are we going?
Take the next left and keep going for a bit. We will then arrive at the Bleeding Sword Academy. The dean of the academy is an old friend of mine and will house us during the tournament.
Without another word, Mogun obeyed his master, and they continued the rest of their journey in comfortable silence.